Oh, thank you so much for your service, Stephanie, and thank you to everybody else giving service today. And a special shout out to those of us like me who are not usually morning people, but are here for the good of our recovery. My name's Harriet. I'm a compulsive overeater, binge eater, restrictor. I came into the rooms during COVID, January 2021. So it's been coming up to 5 years now that I've been in program. Um, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to come and talk about what that's been like today, basically. And I've got a bit of a theme for my share today, which is around denial. Because I was thinking about what I was going to talk about, and the general thing of, how it was, how it's going now, etc., is one that I sometimes follow with shares, but I tend to kind of think about what I feel like I need to share about, and denial is something I feel like I need to share about as kind of like the theme of it. So when it all started back in January 2021, I came into the rooms during COVID in the middle of a mental health crisis. Would not recommend. I was over £400. Had lost my job, not through COVID, through my addiction. And I started OA because I've been speaking to my therapist during COVID, and she kind of very gently said to me, "You need more support than I can offer you right now. Have you considered? I know you're not keen on the idea of group therapy, but have you considered something like OA?" And I was like, "No, what's that?" And she was like, "Well, it's kind of like you've heard of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's like that for people who have a problem with food." And at that point, I was like, well, I don't have a problem with food. I have a problem with self control, but I don't have a problem with food. So fine. So I went to my first OA meeting basically so I could go back and tell my therapist that she was wrong and that I tried doing what she suggested, but that I still wasn't fixed and therefore she wasn't very good at her job. Because that was like my main motivation for things, proving other people wrong was kind of quite a big one. Um, and I went along to my first meeting online with my camera off, ate through it, which was a trend for me during the pandemic to eat my way through meetings. And there were lots of really happy, slim people in the first meeting that I went to. And I was like, yeah, I'm definitely in the wrong place because I was doing less than 100 steps a day, and I was at that point, whether it was going to be for my mental or physical health, I reckon I had about 6 months left to live. And I don't say that to be particularly dramatic. I say that really to kind of help people understand the gravity of the situation that I had to get in. I admitted I had some sort of an issue with food 10 years earlier when my brother had asked me to be a bridesmaid at his wedding. And I said I didn't want to be because all the other bridesmaids were much, much smaller than I was. And he sort of said to me, "Oh, well, you can just lose weight." And I remember saying to him, "I can't." And I couldn't really verbalize it at that point, but I knew that that wasn't a possibility for me because I'd had decades of trying to do that and failing, and I knew that I couldn't do it. Anyway, fast forward then to January 2021, at least 10 years later, where I was finally kind of like, okay, well, maybe there's something in this. I went along and listened to my first meeting and heard that actually there were people like me. They just didn't look like that anymore. People started talking about how they had struggled with food, and how people have been in denial. And, I was in therapy. I'd done therapy for a while. And my first thought was kind of like, oh, it's really a shame that these people aren't as aware as I am about what's going on and about their issues. Very, very smug about it. Um, and the more I started going to meetings, the more I started hearing from people who had been in program for longer than I had been, 5 minutes, the more I started thinking, do you know what? Maybe there's something in this. And I kept going back to the meetings. So I was in meetings probably sort of every other day, I reckon, for about a month before I decided to get a sponsor and start working the steps because it took me that long to kind of go, well, do you know what? I've tried everything else. So let's see if this works fine. And if it doesn't, then it will just be like everything else that I've ever tried to make myself lose weight. Because that was my focus, just losing weight. Anything else was kind of like, fine, whatever I needed to do to kind of get there. And then I worked with a sponsor, I got a plan of eating together, and I started going to meetings and I started working the steps. And I wasn't, as I said, I wasn't working. I didn't have any like childcare responsibilities or anything like that. So the only thing I had to do for a couple of months was OA. And also it was the pandemic, so I wasn't going out. Not that I did a lot of that anyway. So my sole focus became program and doing what I needed to do. And so I was lucky to work the 12 steps quite quickly, relatively speaking. Got into recovery in about May of 2021. And what I had really struggled with in step one is the spiritual principle of honesty. And that's kind of what links into the denial. I knew that I lied to pretty much everybody in my life about my eating and my feelings when I was aware of them. And, you know, that I deliberately kind of manipulated people to kind of get my own way and things like that. So I was actually, you know, I didn't like admitting it, but I was actually pretty kind of accepting of how dishonest I was with other people. I had no idea how much I was lying to myself, how strong that denial was. And as I worked through the steps and then started actually like trying to live life on life's terms, I realized that that denial was a protection, you know. And I've read something this morning in a book about how denial is like a thick blanket. It numbs you from all of your feelings, and it means that you can't feel stuff and you don't really know what's going on, but it's also a protection from harm. And just starting to peel that blanket away, I was really like, oh god, okay, this is too much, but I can do this slowly and gently. And that thick blanket is similar to the reading that I read, is something that I still continue. It's still in my arsenal of tools to use when things get rough, because I did OA for what, as I said, almost 5 years now. It's still not habit to me. It still doesn't undo the previous 3 or 4 decades of living life in a certain way. It doesn't undo my first response to situations. My first response is still going to be to hide, to seek a place of safety when I find myself in situations that continue to challenge me. And sadly, even though I did a lot of spiritual change, my life continued lifing, and a lot of the people in my life didn't do any sort of spiritual changing whatsoever. So there do continue to be challenges that kind of crop up and are presented to me on a daily basis. And it's still something that I find myself retreating back to. Things get tough. I get overwhelmed by emotions and I try and retreat and I try and hide into this blanket of safety. And it's protection from harm, but it's also denial about what my feelings are and what they're actually doing. And I've got very dependent on having that as like a safety blanket. I would say over the last year, there's been some particular challenges that I've really struggled to work through with just program. And so I've gone back to my old safety blanket of denial. And I'm trying to give myself a bit more grace about it, because it's protection. It's one of the things that I developed very, very, very young, and well done me for being so resourceful and working out something that worked for me when I was a literal child, of protecting myself from the harms that were going on. And therefore, it's one of those things that it's very, very difficult to put that blanket down completely or to remove it completely from my life, because it does represent a place of safety. And I kind of felt like I was going to finish the 12 steps and get a certificate and a clap on the back, and then that would be it, really. And I would just suddenly be changed and things would be easy. And it was really a rude awakening to find out that that was not the case. And actually, now it was just, right, all of those situations you thought you were fine in, let's see if you're fine in them when you can't eat afterwards. Answer is, generally speaking, no. All those situations you were just like, no, I can never do this. Well, when you become aware of your feelings, are they easier to navigate? And the answer to that was yes. So everything I thought I knew about my life had to be challenged, because all I knew about my life is what I could and couldn't cope with in the food. And those kind of beliefs about myself are incredibly persistent. And sometimes that forms part of the denial. You know, I had a couple of weeks ago, I had a really rough couple of days where, thank you very much, Melissa, where I was messing about with my food plan and I wasn't getting out and doing my activity, which is really important to me now, having been pretty much immobile. You know, making sure that I'm strong and I can do stuff is a real priority for me. And I wasn't doing it. And all I was doing was kind of retreating away, messing around, doing nothing, and numbing myself. And for me, that involves kind of sitting on the sofa and Netflix and not much else. And it was because there was something I was going through quite a difficult emotional bit, and I was in denial about how I'm not that person anymore. And it was that protection. And the harm with this one was fairly short lived. The harm in this one was going to be me actually examining some pretty big feelings that were being sparked up by my brother in this case, actually, again. And I didn't want to deal with them because they're scary and they're big and they're horrible. And dealing with my feelings is something I continue to be really annoyed about on a daily basis because I prefer just not to do that, actually. And so I went back to that denial blanket and I wrapped myself up tight in it. And I was like, no, I am this person. And this is how I make myself feel better. And I managed to do that, I think, really, and to lie to myself for about 3 days, I think it was, crying a lot and then being like, well, why am I feeling so bad? Oh, it's because of feelings. And it wasn't. It's because I'm no longer that person who that kind of process works for, you know. Some things about me have remained exactly the same before program and after program, but other things are vastly different, you know. And for people who didn't meet me when I came into the rooms, I am incredibly different now. Not just I'm in a much smaller package than I was previously, but my actual kind of approach and accountability that I take for things is completely different. How genuine I am with other people and how much I allow myself to show up, as you know, in terms of revealing my authentic self, is worlds apart from when I first came in. You know, the idea that I would come to a meeting and talk about all of the things that I was really bad at and admit vulnerability, like it would make me feel genuinely physically sick to do that. I'm not that person anymore. But it's that thing of trying to be really gentle and going, this is progress, not perfection. Every single step that I'm taking, whether it's physical, metaphorical, spiritual, whatever, is a step towards a life that I want to live, and a step further away from a life that I don't want to live, because I know exactly how that pans out. And sometimes that feels like it's really, really slow going. And sometimes I look around and I'm like, I'm sure I've been here before. I'm sure I've been here before. Is this not just exactly the same thing that I was dealing with a couple of years ago? And sometimes it is. And the reminder is that you've done this before and you know how you deal with this differently now. So that denial not only protects me from the harm of difficult things, sometimes it protects me from the perceived harm of doing the work. And it's trying to be gentle with myself and go, okay, well, you know what? Some days program is like a Disney film, you know, and I wake up, usually not at this time, the birds are singing, you know, like small woodland creatures come spiritually to me. They help me dress, bathe, prepare for the morning, and I sort of coast through the day. Everything is wonderful and everything is really, really easy. And I do get those days occasionally. And don't get me wrong, they're phenomenal. The vast majority of my time is then just kind of like middling and fine and surviving. Thank you, Melissa. And then some days, there are those days where I wake up and I feel like the Disney villain and everything is dark and the soundtrack is ominous. And I just need to kind of grudgingly drag myself through recovery, because nobody said acceptance had to be graceful, until I can get my head on the pillow and call it another day. And I've got through and I've survived. And that to me is what progress looks like. Recovery is what I do every single day, regardless of how I feel about it. And how comfortable I feel is not necessarily a really good indicator of success. So there's 10 seconds left, so I will leave it there. But thank you very, very much for letting me do service this morning, even if this is very early.